before wool coats, before even the idea of comfort, there was only the cold. Not the soft winter chill you feel today, but a merciless, bone-cracking cold. A cold that seeped into huts through gaps in the thatch. A cold that froze water in buckets beside the hearth. A cold that killed the young, the sick, and the old in silence. For the middle-aged peasant, winter was not a season. It was an enemy. And survival was war. Imagine Europe in the year 1200. The forests are skeletal. The fields are empty and dead, buried under snow. Villages huddle in silence, smoke rising weakly from crooked chimneys. Peasants, those nameless millions who fed kings and armies, were left to battle nature itself. They had no fur-lined cloaks of nobility, no fortified castles with roaring fireplaces, just mud, wood, wool, and willpower. Their names are forgotten, their graves unmarked, yet their struggle against winter is one of the most heroic, brutal, and untold stories of the Middle Ages. This is the tale of how they survived, or didn't. To understand the medieval winter, you must first understand the harvest. Everything depended on it. If the summer's wheat grew tall, the barns filled. If storms ruined the crop, famine awaited. And once the last harvest festival ended in October, life turned grim. The peasant family would retreat into their one-room hut, walls of wattle and daub, roof of thatch. A fire smoldered at the center. Smoke stung their eyes, for there was no chimney, only a hole in the roof. The warmth never spread far. At night, frost would still creep in, forming ice on the straw beds. Food became ritual. Each loaf of bread, each slab of salted port had to last months. Rations grew smaller as winter deepened. By February, the cruelest month, bellies ached with hunger, and children cried themselves to sleep. The peasants called it the hungry gap, the time between winter's end and the first spring growth, a season when starvation was more feared than wolves. Survival in a medieval winter was not luck, it was craft, it was preparation. From autumn's end, peasants forged their weapons against the cold. Not swords or spears, but food, fire, and fabric. Meat was salted until the flesh turned stiff and white. Fish was smoked, hanging in dark rafters, the smell of wood ash lingering through the months. Cabbage, onions, and root vegetables were buried in pits to stay edible beneath the frost. Every morsel was guarded, for waste meant death. Imagine pulling a rough wool tunic over your head, itchy against your skin, then another and another, until your body felt wrapped in coarse layers. Leather shoes stuffed with straw kept feet from freezing. Mothers sewed gloves from scraps of rabbit fur, praying they'd last another winter. At the heart of survival burned the hearth, but wood was scarce. Every log meant hours of labor, trudging into the frozen forest. So peasants learned to bank the fire, burying embers in ash at night so that a spark still glowed by dawn. If the fire died completely, the hut turned into an icebox. Families slept side by side, pressed together on straw pallets, their livestock sometimes brought inside for warmth. The stench of manure, the smoke from the fire, the crying of children, this was the soundtrack of a medieval night. Yet it was warmer than the snowstorm howling just outside. This was the forge of winter survival. Every act, tying a bundle of sticks, slicing a loaf thinner, patching a boot, was a blow against death itself. But sometimes the winter fought back harder. Imagine the year 1315. Across Europe, relentless rains had ruined the harvest. The winter that followed was catastrophic. Snow fell heavy, blocking roads. Grain stores emptied. People boiled bark, grass, even animal bones, just to quiet the hunger in their stomachs. Mothers abandoned infants at monastery gates, too weak to feed them. This was no season, it was war, and nature was merciless. When snow buried the fields, travel became impossible. Villages were cut off. Traders carrying salt or grain and never arrived. Isolation meant starvation. In the worst winters, wolves grew bold, leaving forests to stalk villages. Chroniclers tell of peasants finding tracks circling their huts, glowing eyes in the dark. Some children vanished, snatched on lonely paths. And when nature weakened people, men preyed on each other. Desperate bandits roamed frozen roads, looting carts of food. Sometimes entire starving villages raided their neighbors. In damp, smoky huts, disease thrived. Coughs turned into death rattles. By spring, many villages had lost half their people. Winter was the battlefield where peasants fought not just hunger and cold, but wolves, thieves, and plague. Numbers cannot capture what winter truly meant. To understand, we must step inside one hut. A family of 6 huddles together on a bed of straw. The father's hands are cracked and raw from chopping frozen wood. The mother cuts a single loaf of rye bread into slivers that are almost vanish. A baby coughs in her arms, too weak to cry. The eldest son, just 12, clutches a dull knife, his task to guard against wolves or desperate men. This was survival, not in days, but in hours. Every morning you opened your eyes was a small victory. Peasants turned to faith not only as hope, but as armor. Church bells echoed across frozen fields, calling the hungry and the sick to prayer. Priests spoke of endurance, of heaven's rewards for earthly suffering. In candlelit chapels, peasants begged saints to spare their children. But many prayers went unanswered. When a villager died, the frozen ground was too hard to dig. Bodies were sometimes kept in barns or beneath snowdrifts until spring thaw allowed for burial. Imagine the grief, sharing your one-room hut with the body of a loved one, waiting weeks before you could lay them to rest. And yet, in this darkness, light shone. Neighbors shared grain when possible. Women gathered to spin wool together, singing old songs to drown hunger and frost. Children, shivering, pressed together like wolf pups, learning that warmth was survival. It was loyalty, faith, and family bonds that kept many alive. Not swords, not kings, just love and stubborn defiance of the cold. But not all survived. Between the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe faced what chroniclers later called the Little Ice Age. Winters grew harsher, harvests failed more often, famine struck repeatedly. Entire villages vanished. Wooden huts collapsed under snow and were never rebuilt. Travelers wrote of abandoned churches, fields gone wild, bells that no longer rang. Yet these people left almost no trace. They were peasants, illiterate, nameless in the chronicles of kings. Their suffering went largely unrecorded. But if you walk through certain forests today, you may stumble upon a mound of earth, a crumbling stone wall, or a half-buried well. These are not ruins of castles or cathedrals. They are the ghosts of villages that winter killed. They remind us that history is not only battles and crowns, but the silent wars fought in huts with breadcrumbs and embers against the most ancient enemy of all, the cold. The world has changed. Today, a winter storm means hot chocolate, electric heaters, and thick coats. But in our traditions, in our culture, the memory of brutal medieval winters still lingers. Why do we feast at Christmas and New Year? Because for peasants, midwinter was the bleakest time, their food stores at their lowest. A great feast, sponsored by a lord or the church, was not luxury. It was survival, hope, and community. Why do children still gather close under blankets, telling stories on cold nights? Because in smoky huts, medieval families once huddled together, spinning folk tales to distract from hunger and frost. Even the very word Yule in old European languages spoke of the turning of the year, the desperate hope that spring would return, that the cold would loosen its grip. And the landscape itself bears witness. Archaeologists uncover sunken huts, grain pits, and fire-blackened hearths, the last whispers of those who endured. Their suffering shaped villages, laws, even the rise of stronger kings who promised protection from famine. The struggle of peasants against winter changed the course of history. Before tanks, before trains, before cities of glass and steel, there was only the peasant, the nameless, barefoot worker who faced winters that would have broken most of us today. They fought, not for glory, not for empire, but for a crust of bread, a spark of fire, a single breath of survival. They did not write their names in books, but they wrote their courage into the soil of Europe itself. So the next time you step outside on a cold winter's day and feel the sting of frost on your cheek, remember them, the forgotten millions who endured winters so brutal that they shaped the destiny of nations. Because history is not only kings and battles, it is the story of survival itself. If this forgotten struggle moved you, leave a like, share this story, and subscribe so that the courage of those who came before us is never forgotten.